Okay, well, let's do the readjust. And let's see. Yeah, that's not good. Alrighty. We looked at Compass Games, The God Kings. This is a 2012 release, actually. I don't do a lot of really at-the-moment games. The closest I've come before was probably Space Empires 4X and the Axis Empires sets. Total Krieg and Dicenso. And even this, it took me a couple months to get it to the table. You saw just a first playing there. And these are my impressions from that. First of all, I walked into it with a not knowing that I would be disappointed, that it wouldn't be what I want from this game particularly. In the same way that maybe I walked away from No Peace Without Spain feeling disappointed. Well, I kind of prepared myself for this, and I explained that in the introduction. And to tell you the truth, I should have done better with No Peace Without Spain, and a lot of the games I'm getting. A lot of these CDGs, first of all, CDGs have a barrier beyond which, complexity, detail-wise, they just don't seem to be able to go. I'm not saying there's sort of a scope barrier, and I've touched on this in some of my posts and maybe some of my discussions, where when you try to take too large a piece of history in particular, you can't do the detail that sort of the cards make you want to do. And that's what's wrong with this, in a sense. But here's the thing. And it ends up being kind of a little bit less, a little bit flavorless, a little bit, just less of a game that I want, less of an exploration of the subject matter. In this case, though, there's a double issue. It's not just the light CDG style with that problem baked into it, but it's also there's this historical lack of knowledge. I mean, this is a period that very little is known about. The written records, are fairly limited, and what there is deciphered and trying to put together and figure out what's being said. It could be pure propaganda. Some of the stuff Ramses II has put up makes it look like he's this great king. Well, when you compare him to the other people he was fighting, it doesn't seem like he really was that impressive. So you have to really do a lot of analysis and guesswork as the designer of a game like this. And that's kind of the background on it. And we can take a peek at some of the components very briefly. I mean, you can see in the video, the map is visually, very stunning. And actually, one of the things with this game is that they made an effort, to try to capture some flavor using, I guess, some kind of Sanskrit numbers or something there. The counters, they put what look like Greek-looking fonts on them, which are harder to read, and maybe they improve the experience for someone, but they're kind of anachronistic, and for someone with bad eyes, with trouble seeing things, they're going to be a real problem. In fact, for someone with good eyes, they're probably going to be a mild problem. It does not improve the visibility of the counters. It does not improve the readability. And this is especially important on one little thing, which is the infantry divisions, as well as, if you want to know the leaders' names too, to position them at the different places. But the infantry divisions, you really just have to keep them stacked together, because otherwise you'll be trying to read almost illegible stuff on the sides of the counters. Cards are actually pretty good for my tastes. May not be as sturdy as some people like, but they've got a lot of flexibility, which allows them to shuffle kind of nicely. You can riff them well. The player aids seem to provide, the player aid mats seem to provide everything you need to kind of control your stuff, but I find it kind of difficult, and maybe they contain too much, like a little place to keep a chit that you flip back and forth to say whether or not you've drawn a card. You know, I don't know. It just seems like overkill to me, but I guess if you've got the space, you might as well use it. They are missing some things. For example, they tried to put in that the Kingdom of Egypt deserves something. Some of the cards are printed in a manner that they're not intended to be. There's an extra leader who doesn't really belong. Just issues like that. When we come to the rulebook itself, it's more problematic. There, especially towards the last couple pages, it seems as though there was. It feels to me as though somebody read through and was doing sort of that final editing and got to, I don't know, maybe page 18 or so, and up, it's due, hand it in. So the last couple of pages just don't feel like they've been through that final review, and there's some serious issues in those last couple of pages. These have been addressed with errata, but instead of what you'd expect, which is a little sheet that comes when you do the pre-order, obviously somebody should have been aware and continued with that job at that point. Well, instead of that, it's just an online thing you can print out, and maybe they'll fix it at some point. Maybe you'll be able to get cards that are modified at some point. You certainly can't put a sticker on there. You're stuck to like trying to correct them with a scripto or something. I found a few issues that cover that aren't covered in the errata as well. So I'm not sure how much of that final review was really successful anyway, how much the play testing was really successful. There may have been too many different versions being juggled in the air at once to try to get this out in a producible form as quickly as possible. Anyhow, there's a little bit of sloppiness, a little bit of shoddiness, but it's not terrible. I've seen a lot worse out there. And you can work your way through it. The rules themselves aren't really too bad, but they do leave some loose ends, etc. They're not terribly easy or good reading, but they're also not terribly, well designed to capture every single possibility, which honestly I would rather they not. I would rather they be well written. But in this case, they probably lean a little bit more towards the readability and away from the usability as a reference, which is important to me, or towards trying to explicitly capture every single situation that might happen. But to my feel, and this is the thing with the sort of graphical enhancements to try to capture flavor, it really is a game that works out to be kind of flavorless. There were games like this back in my day, back in the, say, early 80s, late 70s even, that came out following sort of area control type games, especially in the early to mid 80s. Area control type games without a lot of flavor in them. Maybe a few things tacked on. This feels like those. It's not as easy to pick up in my mind because it's an area control game. It's got the disadvantage of trying to capture a humongous era in a game that really, well, with the CDG methodology, which I don't believe can work. I don't believe you can go to something this broad with the CDG very well. Because the CDG's real strength tends to be focusing in on specific events and making them work and happen. Well, this game doesn't have that. This has names that are evocative of the period, Wisdom of Horus, Toenails of Thoth, whatever. And then some effect that may vaguely link to the name on it, but it doesn't really matter. And then you really just don't feel like you're playing with the kind of detailed decks that many of the CDGs seem to shine with. What you feel like you have is one of those very genericized area control type games that came up in the 1 period, and maybe if this had come up then, even as an area control game, without the cards, I'd appreciate it more. But at this point, it feels like the hobby's moving in directions to try to capture the feelings and the spirits of these different eras in a little bit better means. And CDGs is one mechanism for doing so. I don't think it works in this case. I don't think it can work. I think it's too broad a span to give anything other than this kind of flavorless feel. Now, when we start looking at the way the rules interact themselves, you'll see I griped a couple of times in the game. It doesn't feel like battles or wars of this era. Now, with 25-year turns, I don't know how much it should. I think it should be kind of generic, but it doesn't feel right on that level either. So in particular, what we have is this situation where you've got armies that when they fight their massive, climactic battle, well, they stumble away, both damaged, and both still functional. Now that might express something in 5-year rounds, I guess. In 5 years, multiple armies could have washed over that area already. This may not be a situation where you're seeing these, where the battle is really representing this single climactic event. But if that's the case, it's too hard to maneuver. You're too fixed. You feel too much like an army. It's like the scale and the scope of the game don't match the implementation that was chosen here, just the same way they don't match the CDG. And it's kind of like they took, hey, let's take the CDG concept of point-to-point movement and most of the rules that go with that in most games of it, and let's take, the cards and just replace the specific level of information that most of the cards have with these kind of, pansy-ass things. And then we'll try to sell this as a CDG. It just doesn't work. It doesn't fit together right. You'd need so a game like this could be handled on sort of the civilization level, where, you're moving forces that aren't specifically armies. They aren't going to have that climactic battle. It could be handled on the Twilight Struggle level. It can't, I think, I'm not sure, I haven't seen something work that way, but I've definitely seen these area control games where you can, move armies, but they're not really, you don't feel like you don't have specific leaders, you don't have these actual fights that are kind of detailed with events and everything in them, and certainly not with cavalry chariot charges, which just doesn't make sense at this scale, right? You could do that old style game, and that would have actually been an interesting entry, because nobody's done this. Nobody has done this dawn of time of history era with any kind of game except for GMT doing Chariots of Fire. And Chariots of Fire, and the fact that it got enough people interested in it may have helped spark this to get published. I'm not sure. Chariots of Fire is not exactly, one of these things that is shaking the industry and ever has. I'm glad to see an era like this get covered. This is what I want to see. I don't know if this one can ever be covered with a real war game, and this is not. This is one of them light CDGs that, I guess its focus is on war, but it just doesn't feel like a war game to me, right? So it's not, so you might say it's a light ahistorical demi-war game, because it really can't be going into enough detail. And I'm suspecting Chariots of Fire will, even though they're going to that, at least they're going to present a unified vision that makes sense. I can trust that much of Berg and Herman. But this, I regret buying it. I would probably regret not buying it if I didn't either, especially if people started raving at it. And some people are going to like this, I bet. Because you know what? There aren't a lot of these multiplayer CDG-style games that are this light. This is lighter than successors. This has less special rules than successors. I think it could be very appealing to a certain kind of gamer. That kind of gamer is not me and is not what I consider a war gamer, though, in particular. Anyway, it's gonna be a hard sell for me to pick up another Compass game. No Peace Without Spain was a better game, I think, by far. I think it was more historical. My only disagreement with that was I was disappointed because I built my hopes up to something that I had no reason to. With this, I tried to lower those. I tried to make it as fair as possible, but in both cases, I'm walking away with a disappointment. That leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And in both cases, I definitely had that warning flag saying, this is too light. You're not going to want to play this. No Peace Without Spain, I think I will want to play again. This one, this is going to be really tough for me to win. Although I'll say this much. When I walked away from it and stopped doing the camera as much, and then just started playing, it's as much fun as those old area control games. There's nothing terrible about the game. It's a good enough game. It's enough fun. You can kind of imagine what's going on with the historical, inaccuracies or whatever aside. But I don't know how much it fills the itch of really covering this subject in enough detail to make it feel like it's something else. Something different from any other period in particular. And that's kind of the problem. It's flavorless. It looks like they tried to cover that up with some graphical changes, which I have my disagreements about, and ended up really with a game that's more about the graphics than any kind of, learned investigation of the era. It just does not feel like it. One thing that I forgot to mention, and I really have to put in here because it is the interesting point, one of the interesting points to the game, is the way the kings are handled and come in and come out. And again, that doesn't feel terribly... It doesn't feel bad, it doesn't feel good. There's a lot of luck in it, you have some control with the cards. But it's one of the things that makes the game kind of more flavorful. I wish that maybe they weren't pre-programmed. Knowing what they're going to be, a game with this much luck, take the Empires of the Middle Ages route and, allow you to have random ones. Maybe. I don't know. But there is something interesting to it. It may provide a certain level of a cycle or a pattern to the game that helps maybe distinguish it from other games, even if it doesn't really feel the period terribly well because of that. It does kind of give you something to latch onto and say, I like that about this game in particular. That's the really interesting point. And then there's also, of course, the falling back, the way that your troops get repositioned at the beginning of each turn, where it's only kind of in a fully connected area to your empire. So you have to go from your homeland to areas that are direct, that you can trace a direct line to. So you might have pieces of your empire spread around that you can't set up in, and that become very hard to defend. But there again, the pattern, the cycle of the game doesn't really feel like it makes sense. Why is it every 25 years my army is recalled? What's up with that exactly? Obviously every year is too short. Equally obviously, the game's already got this scale. It is a long enough game. I think it's probably an 8 to 10 hour game full out. The game's already got this big scope and a certain scale to the turns. And how would you break it up more? What would would you recall them every round or whatever? But it just doesn't make any sense no matter where you put that recall in if it's just cyclic. It almost feels like it shouldn't be there, even though it's one of the distinguishing features of the game. And it was hard to catch that rule, actually. Anyway, that's it for this. Up it goes. I'm going to probably put some really light, weird things up soon.